I, 27, female, recently got engaged to my boyfriend Nate, 23, male. We've been together for 2 years and it took me a while to say yes to his proposal for several reasons. The first is the age difference, obviously. Not that I think it's inappropriate, but just never expected myself to end up with someone so much younger than me, and neither did anyone else. The second one was the fact that we'd only been together for 2 years and had been living together just for 6 months. He works in a bank with a friend of mine, which is how we met in the first place. His salary is decent, but much lower than mine, but I'd never thought about it, which I now regret. I'm a human resources manager at a huge and reputable firm, and I easily make almost twice what he makes. When we decided to live together, he was the one who moved into my house. I'm the one who took care of all the bills and household expenses, and even when we'd go out on short trips and vacations, I'd be the one paying. He'd just take me out on 1 or 2 dates every month and call it a day. I never made a big deal of it because, frankly, it just didn't seem that important to me. I was happy with him regardless of what he earned, and I thought he was happy with our life, too. Clearly, I was wrong. Around 3 months ago, he asked me to marry him, and initially, I said no because of the reasons that I've already mentioned above. He managed to wear me down eventually, though, and convince me that we were meant to be. I was pretty emotional that day, since we just celebrated our first anniversary and I'd had a little too much to drink as well. My news of our engagement also helped me reconnect with my mother, 49, female. Yet another thing that I regret. My mother wasn't the best mom growing up and always favored my ex-best friend, Leah, 26, female, while we were growing up. The situation there is kind of complicated. Leah was my neighbor growing up, and we were the best of friends until high school. My mom loved Leah and treated her like her own daughter, probably the one she actually wished she had, I guess. My dad had left us before I was born and had never been in the picture at all. Whatever I know about him is what I learned from my aunt and grandparents, since my mother would get really annoyed any time I asked about him as a kid, so I learned not to ask her. My parents had met in college and were pretty serious, but my dad ended up cheating on my mom in their final year. They'd even talked about getting married, so that was a huge blow, and she pretty much broke things off with him immediately. Then, a few weeks after their breakup, she realized that she was pregnant and had to go back to talk to him regarding me. She'd asked him if he wanted to be a part of my life, and he just straight up refused, saying that he had no intention of committing to becoming a father so young when he had his whole life ahead of him. My mother was lucky enough to have her family to take care of her and provide for her because she was extremely depressed during the course of her pregnancy. When I was born, she spiraled deeper since I was the spitting image of my father, and I still am. I've only ever seen one picture of him, but I can't deny that there's a striking resemblance. Both of us have the same dark hair, long nose, and brown eyes. My mother is blonde, has green eyes, and is more on the petite side, while I'm almost 6 feet, so we have nothing in common in terms of how we look. Leah, on the other hand, is like a miniature version of my mother, which isn't surprising since her mother looks similar to mine. Leah's mother and my mother weren't just neighbors, but were also really good friends. So when Leah was born, she was as thrilled as her actual mother. My grandparents and aunt lived in the same house as my mom while we were growing up to keep an eye on her so she wouldn't spiral once more, and they told me how my mom would constantly bring Leah over to play with me when we were babies and would often interact with her more than me. Of course, I found out about these things much more recently. Anyway, growing up, Leah and I were pretty much inseparable. It was almost like a movie because our mothers were close friends and we were best friends, so we went to the same school and would hang out all the time. When I got a little older, I started noticing how my mother would treat Leah and me differently sometimes, but I never let it get to me since I also thought of Leah as nothing less than a sister. My mother would always seem a lot happier whenever Leah was around and would give Leah her old clothes, jewelry, and whatnot. It would feel a little weird, but then she'd dismiss my concerns, saying that she felt her things would look better on Leah because of how similar they looked, and I would accept that answer, so we were all happy. All of that changed in high school, though. I had my first crush on a senior when I was in my sophomore year, and I told all my friends about him. It was this really cute guy, too, and Leah knew about it. Obviously, I'd never had a crush on a real guy before. It had only been celebrity crushes, so this was a huge deal for us. I even talked to him for a couple of months, but then he ended up taking Leah to prom. I was devastated, but even then, I didn't blame Leah for it or for agreeing to go with him. He was a cute senior and he'd supposedly asked her out, so why would she say no? It wasn't until months later that I happened to be speaking to that senior as a friend, and he revealed to me that it had been Leah who'd been asking him out for months before he'd finally agreed to take her with him to prom. According to him, she'd started asking him out around the same time that I told her about my crush, so that came as a huge shock to me. I confronted her about it later on, and she denied it vehemently and managed to convince me that it was he who had been lying to me. So I stopped talking to that guy because that's how much I trusted Leah. And then just 2 months after that, I found her making out with my boyfriend in my room at my birthday party. We got into a huge fight, and she eventually snapped and said that she was glad that she'd taken my boyfriend because he deserved better and she definitely was better than me. That incident effectively ruined our friendship forever, and we haven't been on speaking terms since then. Now, people would think that because of my fallout with Leah, my mother would have at least had the decency to stop calling her over, but she didn't. When I saw her in my house, sitting on my couch and chatting with my mom like nothing had happened just a week after the incident, I confronted my mother about it, and all she had to say was that she didn't want to ruin her relationship with people over petty arguments that don't concern her. I was shocked, and we ended up getting into several fights about this, but my mother never seemed to care. Of course, she denied it whenever I accused her of caring about Leah more than her own daughter, but it was very obvious to me who she liked better. So as soon as I got a job and had enough money saved up, I moved out and haven't looked back since. My mom and I still talk sometimes, but it's more of an obligation than something I truly want to do. There was just a lot of bitterness and resentment that I felt towards her, and even though my engagement had brought us closer, she betrayed me once more for Leah's sake again, and that was the last straw for me. A few weeks after our engagement, I began to feel that Nate was being distant, but didn't pay much mind to it because I just chalked it up to nerves. Never in 1,000 years could I imagine that he'd be cheating on me, at least not back then. And with Leah, of all people, who hasn't been a part of my life since high school ended. My mother had reached out to me when I'd announced my engagement on social media, and had even apologized to me for how she treated me in the past, so I bought it like a total fool. She was a part of everything that I'd planned, since she'd said that she wanted to play an active role in the wedding, so she, along with my bridesmaids, had all been there for the entire process of planning the wedding. She knew everything, right from the colors to the flowers. She also knew that I wanted to go to Italy for my honeymoon and had also helped me pick out my dress. What I didn't know was that she'd been telling Leah all about my choices simultaneously so that they could create a rip-off of my entire wedding. 2 weeks ago, Nate didn't respond to any calls or messages that I sent, and I was really worried since this had never happened before and he'd been acting increasingly distant and weird during the days leading up to then. But then, in the evening, I started receiving a lot of texts from my friends, and to my horror, I saw that they were sending me screenshots of Nate's most recent post. It was our wedding, or a replica of it, but there was just one significant difference. I wasn't in it. In my place, Leah was standing beside Nate in what was supposed to be my wedding dress surrounded by decor that I'd personally picked out. He'd captioned it with nothing but a heart emoji, so I had absolutely no idea what to think of this. I was honestly just numb. I tried to get through to him several times, ignoring all the texts and calls that I received from my friends, but he was still unresponsive. After an hour or so, reality finally sunk in and I was shattered. He really had gotten married to Leah, and I accepted that this wasn't just some prank. I didn't even need to call my mother to ask if this was her doing. I could just feel it. Nobody else in my circle would be cruel or stupid enough to do something like this. I didn't know exactly how this had happened, but I knew for a fact that my mother definitely had a huge role to play in this. And Nate confirmed that for me in his breakup message that he sent me the next morning, very graciously explaining his side of the story through text. He told me that a few weeks after our engagement, my mother herself had texted him and told him that I wasn't the right woman for him, and she had someone better in mind. Out of curiosity, he agreed to a date, and it turned out to be Leah. He knew about our history, but that didn't stop him from continuing to see her over the next few weeks. He said that he fell for her during the course of these past few weeks that he spent with her, and getting married before I found out was Leah's and my mother's idea. In fact, they'd been the ones to arrange all of it, which wasn't surprising to me at all. I'm sure that my mother and Leah paid for most of it, since Nate definitely couldn't afford a wedding like that, given his salary. Anyway, he ended his text by telling me that he and Leah were leaving for Italy on the day that our wedding was supposed to be, and requested me not to bother him ever again. I don't know why he was afraid of that happening, since I'd already made up my mind to never, ever contact any of these three people again. Not after something so twisted like this. But yesterday, 3 days after the day that they left for Italy, my mother called me up and she was furious. She had to use a friend's phone since I'd blocked her number, and that made her even more mad. She accused me of sabotaging Leah's life on purpose by showing off my relationship with Nate and making it seem like we lived a glamorous lifestyle so that she'd want him. But in reality, he had no money of his own and lived off of my salary. So my mother and Leah had just assumed that it was Nate's money that paid for our lifestyle and not mine, since they didn't know much about me. And in Italy, Leah had discovered that Nate didn't really earn that much and would be heavily reliant on whoever he had married. Which is also the reason why he'd started dating me in the first place, for the money. I know that now, even though he wouldn't ever admit to it. But anyway, my mother was livid and said that I'd set them up, so I just laughed at her and congratulated her on her real daughter's wedding before hanging up, because none of this was my problem anymore. In fact, I owed them big time for taking Nate away, or else I might have ended up paying for him my entire life and remained blissfully unaware of how disloyal he was. My mother and Leah helped me see the truth, so I'm thankful for that. She's been trying to text me from various accounts, accusing me of ruining Leah's life out of jealousy, but I'm not sure how that's going to help their situation now. So anyway, AITA for not making it known to my mother that my fiancé lived off of my salary? Update 1. So it's been a week since my post here, and the situation has taken a really weird turn, at least for me. Last night, Nate came back to my apartment, and I'd thought that he'd just come to take back his things, but as soon as I opened the door for him to enter, he fell to his knees and started groveling, which was just really pathetic. I told him as kindly as I could that this wasn't going to help anyone, and the damage had already been done, so it would be best for him to just collect his things and leave. But he refused to go away unless I talked to him and gave him at least one chance to explain himself. He wouldn't even leave when I threatened to call the cops, so I knew that there was no way to get rid of him unless I heard him out. Although I'm not sure how his explanation was going to make anything better. We sat down and he told me that he was extremely apologetic for what he'd done to me, and that his little getaway with Leah had made him realize how good he has it with me. This is obviously just the most idiotic thing to say because I was the one paying for everything, so no wonder he found it easier to be with me rather than someone who wanted him to be paying for stuff. I don't even know how they decided to get married without even knowing each other's financial status. He apologized some more for cheating on me and promised me that it wouldn't happen again, as if I'd even give him the chance to do it again. After his apology, I told him to take his belongings and get out, and he had the audacity to act surprised. I told him that I'd only agreed to hear his side of the story so that he'd leave me alone, and now that that was done, he needed to go. So once more, he started crying and begging for me to take him back. But this time, I actually picked up my phone and said that I really would call the cops now if he didn't go away. So he left, but he was still crying and asking me to take him back even while he was leaving. Now, coming to the weirdest part of all this, my mother had texted me nonstop and accused me of ruining Leah's life a few days back, but then she'd stopped abruptly within a day. A few hours after Nate's visit last night, my mother started texting me again, and this time she wasn't being accusatory, but was actually apologizing to me. I have no idea what's happening, to be honest, because now, out of the blue, both of these people are coming up to me and apologizing, which is just so weird to me. The only thing weirder than this would be if even Leah texted me and apologized. I have no idea what's happening, but I can feel that there's something off about this whole thing. Update 2. I was right about this whole situation being off. 3 days have passed since the last update, and today Leah and Tate showed up at my house together. I was shocked to see them both because obviously they're the last people that I would ever want to see during such a time. I almost slammed the door shut on their faces, but they were strong enough to keep the door open and demanded that I let them in. I argued with them for a few minutes and even threatened them once more with the cops, but they didn't care, so I had to just let them in. I was really afraid, so I didn't even touch my phone because I thought they certainly wouldn't be scared of hurting me if it came down to it, and they certainly looked that way. So anyway, after they were in, Leah explained to me that they tried to get the money they'd spent on the wedding and honeymoon the nice way and had Nate and my mother apologize to me, but I hadn't taken that well, so now they were here in person to take what they deserved. I was astonished at what they were demanding since I didn't think I owed them anything. I didn't care that the apologies were fake. Obviously, they were in cahoots with each other and were planning to extort money from me eventually with their fake apologies. They'd planned to say that they were sorry just to pacify me and I'd eventually just take them all back, but that didn't work because unfortunately I'm not as stupid and soft as they think I am and didn't fall for it. So they were not planning to intimidate me into giving them the money that they'd spent on everything. I don't even understand how they'd assumed I'd be paying for any of it after all of them betrayed me on so many levels, and despite my fear, I told them that. Nate seemed to keep his calm, probably because he didn't want any trouble, but Leah flared up and started arguing with me viciously. She told me that she knew I'd always been jealous of her, and once again, I was accused of ruining her life. She told me that it wasn't her fault, that her mother liked her more than me and demanded that I make up for everything that I'd done to her by paying her back. I didn't have much to say to that, so I just said I wasn't going to give her anything because she simply didn't deserve it. That's when she stood up, came towards me and slapped me so hard that I swear I couldn't even hear anything for the next few seconds. Even Nate stood up, out of shock, when he realized what had just happened and made a run for it. He opened the door and ran away. I couldn't believe that she'd had the guts to actually slap me and sat there in disbelief while she screamed at me for the next few minutes. I didn't even know what to do, but then I realized what had happened and stood up, grabbed my phone, which I'd stupidly kept on the coffee table, and then ran to my bedroom as fast as I could and locked the door. She followed me back there and kept banging on the door for the next few minutes while I called the police and waited for them to arrive. I was scared out of my wits while she screamed at me throughout like a total psycho. After a few minutes, the cops arrived and were able to arrest her, after which I finally came out of my room. She was still pretty hysterical and was cursing at me as loudly as she could while the cops dragged her away, and they even had to force her into the car. I told them everything that had happened, and even as I was reporting that to them, I could hardly even believe what had just happened. Eventually, she was arrested and taken away. I'm still in shock about this whole thing, and even though I knew that Leah wouldn't stop at anything to get what she wants, it never even occurred to me that she'd do something as psychotic as this. It's been almost an hour since, and I haven't received any message from my mother yet, so I'm assuming she doesn't know what's happened yet. I'm sure when she does find out, I'm going to be in for another dramatic phone call or visit, which I'm already so done with, even as I think about it right now. Update 3. 3 hours have passed since they dragged Leah away, and half an hour ago I guess my mother found out and immediately called me up to scream at me and blame me for everything, but I wasn't taking any of this crap anymore. I told her that none of this was my fault, and if either she, Nate, or Leah ever even dared to text me ever again, then I'd be taking legal action against them and would make sure that they regret whatever they've been doing to me so far. They just can't keep messing with me and get away with it. She tried to fight with me and told me that I was letting my jealousy take over, but honestly, what would I even be jealous of? She could keep the failure and second-hand boyfriends, and I'd keep my success. There is just no competition between me and Leah. My mother can continue to be delusional and pick her favorite girl over her daughter, but that's not going to change the fact that I just am better than all of them combined. Now, whatever happens, I'm ready to fight back no matter what it takes, and I'm hoping they're not dumb enough to try anything else after this either. I've already spoken to my lawyer, and I'm going to file a restraining order against Leah within the next few days. And if my mother or ex try anything funny at all, they'll be next. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.